CEOs, even politicians. Some of the biggest cases Kinsey had ruled on were nothing more than transactions, verdicts for sale. He's not working alone, she muttered. Henshaw leaned in. That's what I'm trying to tell you. We're talking millions being funneled through offshore accounts, laundered through fake businesses. Some of these cases were supposed to put criminals away for life. Instead, Kinsey let them walk. Bondi clenched her jaw. A corrupt judge was one thing, a network protecting him was something else entirely. But there was something more pressing. You said he's moving money, she said. Where? Henshaw hesitated. That's the problem. He's covering his tracks. Some of the offshore accounts were emptied in the last week. If he's planning to run, we don't have much time. Pam pushed the files aside. This case had just become bigger than she expected. Then we force his hand back in her office. Bondi called Kyle Donahue. He answered immediately. You were right, she said. It's not just Kinsey, he's part of something bigger. Kyle exhaled on the other end. I told you, and if you're seeing what I saw, you know how dangerous this is. Bondi leaned back in her chair. I need more, something that ties him directly to a bribe. Kyle hesitated. There's one thing, but it's risky. Bondi didn't blink. Go on. A former court clerk, Natalie Briggs. She worked in Kinsey's chambers for years. She left suddenly a few months ago. No one knows why, but I heard she had information on him. Pam's fingers drummed against her desk. Where is she now? Kyle lowered his voice. She's keeping a low profile. I don't think she wants to be found. Bondi's mind was already moving. If Natalie had worked closely with Kinsey, she knew things that could blow this case wide open. I require an address. Side of Kyle. Bondi, be cautious. If she has evidence that Kinsey isn't the only one who wants to keep quiet, I'll see what I can do. The address. Kyle discovered LED Bondi at a small, one-story home outside of Tampa. The front yard was overgrown, and the porch light flickered once a week. She knocked twice without getting a response, then loudly again. Briggs, Natalie. Pam Bondi is my name. The door cracked open just enough for me to speak with you. A woman's eyes seemed worn, and her expression vanished. I know you worked for Judge Kinsey, but Bondi didn't move. I don't know what you're talking about, but I believe I understand why. Natalie's hold on the door tightened when you abruptly departed. Bondi said in a softer tone, I think you've been carrying this alone for too long, and Natalie paused before opening the door and entering. If anyone asks, you were never here, she said, and that's when Bondi realized she was going to learn something that would completely alter Natalie Briggs's life. Pam Bondi walked slowly inside the house, watching Natalie's every move. The woman was nervous, not just afraid, but hunted. She motioned toward a worn-out couch, said what she needed to say, and then left. The house was filled with unease, the blinds were drawn, and the room was dark except for a single lamp in the corner. Boxes that were half-packed near the door as if she were ready to leave at any moment. You spent years working for Judge Kinsey, teaching things, and knowing things, Bondi said as she sat with her hands on her knees and spoke steadily. Natalie laughed dryly. You think I don't know that? You think I don't wake up every day regretting what I saw and what I ignored? Pam, stoop a little and tell me what you know. I kept the unofficial books, the ones that never made it to the courthouse records, as Natalie folded her arms and let out a harsh exhale. I knew it was wrong when I saw the money coming in, where it went, and who benefited, but when you're involved and it's your livelihood, you tell yourself it's not your problem. Try me, you won't like this. A pause occurred. Kyle was correct. Kinsey's assets are concealed under fictitious firms. We were able to track 3 different shell companies to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, and each one was connected to cases he decided on, all of which benefited a well-known defendant. Bondi gripped the steering wheel more tightly because she had witnessed corruption of this type before, where money was transferred through layers of fictitious organizations meant to conceal the true players. Kinsey had been extremely cautious, but this is sufficient to launch an investigation, she said, adding that if we can directly link one of those transactions to a decision, we have him. Exhaling, Henshaw said, there's more. One of our informants informed us that Kinsey is aware that he is being followed, so he began transferring money and preparing to go. Bondi's stomach turned upside down. Bondi briefly felt gratified that the pressure was having an effect, but it also signified something else. Kinsey hung up and took her case file from the passenger seat because she wasn't going down without a fight. Now was the time to move on. With her heels clicking on the marble flooring, Bondi walked confidently across the courthouse lobby. She had spent years in courtrooms like this, witnessing the system function as it should, but this time the system was the issue. The building smelled like old wood and paper, like a place where judgments were made and lives were changed. Outside Kinsey's courtroom, Kyle was waiting for her. His anxious gaze darted to the doors. You're really doing this? He questioned. Bondi nodded. We don't have a choice inside. Bondi had seen enough to know the truth and sat toward the back, watching Judge Kinsey's every move while he presided over an ongoing trial. His expression was unreadable, the ultimate image of control. When the trial adjourned for recess, she made her move, called, and strode toward the bench. Kinsey looked up, clearly irritated, but her mind was elsewhere. The way he spoke, the way he leaned forward when delivering a ruling, the way he feinted impartiality, it was all a performance, and she was about to tear it apart. Bondi, miss, I didn't know you were involved in these processes, she continued, but I think we still have some unresolved business. Bondi didn't move Kinsey's side and stepped down from the bench, his voice dropping. If you're here about that nonsense from your whistleblower, don't waste your breath, you have nothing. The courtroom gradually cleared out as lawyers gathered their papers and clerks moved between seats. Bondi grinned and gave him a manila folder, saying, we'll see about that. Financial documentation, business relationships and offshore accounts. Judge, you've been careless. Bondi saw a crack in the mask and a flicker of something behind Kinsey's eyes, so he opened the folder and scanned the pages before closing it. This indicates that nothing has been said by Bondi yet, but she turned to leave, but before she could get to the door, Kinsey's voice interrupted, you are making a mistake. Pam glanced over her shoulder, but no, Robert, you did, and now everyone was going to know. Although Bondi has dealt with threats prior to the position, you're making a mistake based on Judge Robert Kinsey's statement. It wasn't merely a warning, Pam, it was a challenge. Without hesitation, she took her phone out of her pocket and left the courthouse to enter the muggy Florida day. Investigator Henshaw, I need to meet with you in 30 minutes. This is everything we pulled in the last 24 hours. Bondi sat across from Henshaw in a small, dimly lit diner on the outskirts of town. The coffee was awful, but they weren't there for the food. Henshaw put a stack of papers between them. Kinsey shell companies have ties to some extremely influential individuals. Bondi looked over the paperwork and saw developers' names. He thought his dominance would protect him. He thought no one would dare oppose him. Yet when Pam Bondi disclosed his secret transactions, his reign came to a crashing halt. Pam Bondi had faced tough cases before. For as Florida's former attorney general, she had taken on corrupt politicians, drug cartels and high-profile criminals who thought they were untouchable. But this was different. She sat at her desk flipping through the thick file in front of her pages of financial records, deposition transcripts and sworn affidavits. The farther she read, we iron bed, the worse it became. A judge, someone who had sworn an oath to defend justice, was at the center of it all. Judge Robert Kinsey, who had been on the bench for more than 20 years and presided over cases that affected thousands of lives, had a perfect record and a stellar reputation. Sterling, at least on paper, but Bondi was wise enough to not believe what she saw. Her client, Kyle Donahue, sat rigidly in his chair. A former courthouse clerk, Kyle had discovered something that most people would have ignored and buried, but he had come forward with what he knew, even at the expense of his career in personal safety. Are you telling me that? For years, Kinsey handled cases without anyone noticing. Bondi asked in a steady, sharp voice, and Kyle exhaled while rubbing his hands together. People didn't notice, but they looked away because he was cautious and never took money directly or moved without hiding his tracks. But I did see case files vanish and verdicts that didn't make sense. Decisions that repeatedly benefit a few. Bondi examined him. Whistleblowers were uncommon, and those who survived this far are even more uncommon. Please provide me with specifics, she said. Kyle gave an example of a developer who should have been imprisoned for defrauding millions of dollars in a real estate scandal last year, Daniel Reyes. Pam, but Kinsey tossed out important evidence and said it was handled improperly. Then, Reyes goes free, proving it wasn't an accident. Bondi turned to the part of the file that described Reyes's case. The judge's justification for rejecting the evidence was, at best, dubious and, at worst, downright dishonest, but there were dozens of examples similar to it. After a sudden lack of evidence, a company executive who was charged with insider trading was dropped. A well-known money launderer was found guilty by a jury, and a prominent businessman with connections to offshore accounts had his case dismissed on a technicality. Citing inadequate jury instruction, Kinsey reversed the verdict, pointing to a pattern that pointed the judge and the source of the funds. Bondi checked his finances to see what you had. Kyle paused, which is where things get complicated. His official records are spotless. I discovered several offshore accounts and real estate holdings under different names, but he halted and his voice lowered, so I believe he's being protected. No significant deposits, no abrupt changes in lifestyle. I don't know yet, but if you look closely enough, you'll find the names. Bondi's eyes tightened as the cow shook his head. Pam Bondi leaned back in her chair. She had faced corruption before, but this time it was different. This was a system designed to protect the guilty and silence anyone who approached too closely. Her instincts told her that Judge Kinsey wouldn't be defeated quietly if they were correct, but she wasn't scared of a fight, and she had a feeling that this was only the beginning. While the Florida heat pressed against the windows of the Hillsborough County Courthouse, Pam Bondi sat in her car parked a block away from the building, knowing that exposing a corrupt judge wasn't just about proving guilt but also about surviving the battle that followed. Judge Robert Kinsey continued his work as usual, his black robe protecting him from suspicion, while her phone buzzed. Detective Mark Henshaw's voice was low and cautious, but she answered right away and told me you had found something. Kinsey already knew she was coming for him. Pam Bondi sat in her office staring at the flash drive in her hand. It was small, unremarkable, but the weight of what it contained was massive. Natalie Briggs had just handed her the key to exposing Judge Robert Kinsey. Proof, hard, irrefutable proof of his corruption, offshore accounts, wire transfers, case notes, even transcripts of conversations that should have never existed. She plugged the drive into her laptop. The files opened instantly, rows of data filling the screen, and then she saw it, a transaction log dated 3 years ago, a name attached, Daniel Reyes, the real estate developer who had walked free on fraud charges. The case Kinsey had dismissed on a technicality. Pam's pulse quickened. Another entry, another name, Lewis Carver, a hedge fund manager whose insider trading case had mysteriously collapsed in court. It was all here, every case Kinsey had touched, every payoff, every decision he had sold. Her mind raced. There was no way Kinsey had done this alone. Too many people had looked the other way, but right now she had one job. She reached for her phone and called Detective Henshaw to take him down. I have what we need, she said steadily. Henshaw didn't hesitate, it was happening. The following morning, Bondi entered the Hillsborough County Courthouse, taking deliberate steps because she knew Kinsey would see her. She walked past clerks and attorneys who didn't realize that within hours, everything would change in courtroom 3B. The case of State versus Simon Caldwell was in progress, and there was also a corporate fraud case that Kinsey would probably manipulate to shield the guilty. Pam sat down close to the front. Judge Kinsey, in black robes, sat at the bench and exuded the same composed authority that he always had. If he saw the walls closing in, he didn't show it. The prosecutor was in the middle of his sentence when Bondi jumped up for her honor. Kinsey's head jerked upward. Pulling a thick file out of her bag, Miss Bondi interrupted, "You are not counseling this matter, sit down, or I have urgent business before the court." The room fell silent. Kinsey's jaw tensed, "You're not in line." Bondi remained still. "You have betrayed the confidence of this court, the people of Florida, and the fundamental basis of justice itself, Robert Kinsey. This is ridiculous." Kinsey's grip on his gavel tightened as a murmur echoed through the courtroom, snapping bailiff, but the doors at the rear of the room flew open. 2 federal agents and Detective Henshaw went inside. The room gasped as Pam stepped forward and placed the flash drive on the clerk's desk. It contains records of illegal transactions and offshore accounts that date back 10 years. Every decision you made that was purchased and paid for. Kinsey's face was paled. "This is a baseless attack on your honor." Henshaw then said, "We have a warrant for your arrest." "You think this will stand up?" Kinsey hissed, his voice low. "You think the system will turn on me?" As Pam watched his hands twist into fists. He understood that his world was collapsing. Judge Robert Kinsey, a man who had exercised power over countless lives, stood frozen as U.S. Marshals fastened the cold steel of handcuffs around his wrists. For a moment, he didn't move or speak, and the silence stretched the weight of his downfall on everyone in the room. Then, slowly, he turned his gaze toward Pam Bondi. "This is a mistake." Pam Bondi finally saw the truth in his eyes as the courtroom that Kinsey had ruled over for years was now against him. The courtroom erupted with attorneys, clerks, reporters, and everyone was either whispering in shock or watching in stunned silence as the once powerful judge was escorted from the bench he had ruled from for decades. As Kinsey passed, Bondi noticed a flicker of something dark in his eyes, not just anger, a warning that this isn't over. He growled in a low-controlled voice, but Bondi heard what was underneath it, panic. She didn't flinching, "But no, Robert, it's justice." Before she could get to her car, Bondi left the courthouse and into the sweltering Florida Sun News vans lining the street. Reporters were rushing to get statements, but she didn't stop. Bondi continued to walk. "So it's not finished," and Sean nodded as Detective Henshaw slid into place next to her. "You're correct. Kinsey is only the beginning of this problem, the links and money trail. This is much more than just him." When Bondi stops looking at him, we continue. For a little moment, Henshaw examined her. "Are you certain you're prepared for that?" She considered Natalie Briggs, Kyle Donahue, and all the cases. When Kinsey met Henshaw's gaze, she corrupted everyone who had suffered because one man believed his power was more valuable than their lives. "If it weren't 3 days later, I wouldn't be here." At the Tampa Federal Detention Center, Kinsey sat in an interrogation room wearing a beige prison uniform in place of his suit, making him appear older and smaller. Pam Bondi, who was standing on the opposite side of the glass, cocked an eyebrow as she watched Henshaw approach and start talking. The detective nodded, just enough to unnerve certain people, but not enough to reveal all just yet. Henshaw mentioned names, transactions, and backroom meetings while Bondi crossed her arms and tried to close a deal. "That's precisely what we believed. He wasn't merely filthy, rather, he was a component of a machine." Bondi didn't turn away, so we tore it apart. For the first time in his life, Kinsey moved his head slightly as though he could feel her presence behind the glass. He didn't pass judgment since corruption isn't always obvious, it doesn't always be signaled by sirens or flashing lights. Justice can occasionally be concealed by a judge's voice, a pen stroke, or the weight of a gavel. Pam Bondi witnessed the system's failure and individuals abusing the law for personal benefit, but she also witnessed what occurs when the proper people don't give up, and she believes that's what revitalizes the system. Silence allows corruption to flourish, but it is a decision. Speak up if you see or know something, because the truth will always come to light. To read more stories about the unseen struggles for justice, subscribe.